Tensions between China and the Philippines are once again rising sharply in the South China Sea, with the Scarborough Shoal emerging as the latest flashpoint in a growing regional crisis. Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. now faces one of the biggest foreign policy challenges of his presidency as Beijing expands its presence in near the disputed waters and Manila responds with stronger diplomatic and military measures. The Scarborough Shoal, known in the Philippines as Bajo de Masinloc, has long been a source of conflict between the two countries. Located west of Luzon, the reef sits in a strategically important area rich in fishing resources and close to major shipping routes. Although the Philippines says the shoal lies well within its exclusive economic zone under international law, China continues to claim the territory as part of its historical maritime boundaries. The latest confrontation began after Philippine officials accused Chinese vessels of restricting Filipino fishermen from entering the waters surrounding the shoal. According to Philippine authorities, Chinese Coast Guard ships and maritime militia vessels deployed barriers across parts of the entrance, preventing local fishing boats from accessing traditional fishing grounds that generations of Filipino fishermen have depended on. Philippine Coast Guard officials described the situation as another attempt by Beijing to tighten operational control over the disputed area. Move immediately triggered concern inside Manila, where leaders warned that continued restrictions could increase tensions and further destabilize the region. For many Filipinos, the issue goes beyond politics or military strategy. Thousands of families rely on fishing activities around Scarborough Shoal for their livelihoods. Fishermen have repeatedly reported being chased away, blocked, or intimidated by larger Chinese vessels patrolling the area. Some have described dangerous encounters involving water cannons, aggressive maneuvering, and constant surveillance. The Scarborough Shoal dispute has remained one of the most emotional and symbolic territorial issues in the Philippines. Many citizens view Chinese actions as a direct challenge to Philippine sovereignty and national dignity. Public frustration has grown steadily over recent years as confrontations in the South China Sea became more frequent. President Ferdinand Marcos Jr., who took office promising a stronger defense of Philippine territorial rights, has adopted a more assertive approach compared to previous administrations. His government has expanded military cooperation with the United States, increased maritime patrols, and pushed for stronger international support regarding the South China Sea disputes. At the same time, Marcos Jr. has tried to maintain diplomatic communication with Beijing in order to avoid a direct military confrontation. His administration continues engaging China through high-level discussions while also strengthening security partnerships with regional allies and Western powers. This balancing act has become increasingly difficult. China continues to expand its maritime operations throughout the South China Sea. Chinese Coast Guard ships, naval forces, and maritime militia vessels regularly patrol disputed waters claimed not only by the Philippines, but also by Vietnam, Malaysia, and other Southeast Asian nations. Security analysts believe Beijing's strategy is designed to gradually strengthen effective control over contested areas without triggering outright war. By maintaining constant patrols and using civilian-style maritime forces alongside official Coast Guard ships, China can pressure rival claimants while staying below the threshold of open military conflict. The Philippines, however, has become more determined to resist those tactics. Under Marcos Jr., Philippine authorities have adopted a strategy of public transparency. The government frequently releases videos, photographs, and official reports documenting encounters between Philippine and Chinese vessels in disputed waters. Officials believe publicizing these incidents helps generate international support and counters Chinese narratives about the situation. The United States has openly backed the Philippines in many of these disputes. Washington has repeatedly emphasized that the Mutual Defense Treaty between the two countries applies to attacks on Philippine public vessels and armed forces operating in the South China Sea. Military cooperation between Manila and Washington has expanded rapidly in recent years. Joint military exercises have become larger and more frequent, while American access to Philippine military bases has increased under existing defense agreements. China strongly opposes these developments. Beijing accuses the United States of encouraging confrontation and using the Philippines as part of a broader strategy to contain China's influence in the Indo-Pacific region. Chinese officials insist that external powers are worsening tensions instead of promoting stability. Manila rejects those accusations, arguing that the Philippines is simply defending its sovereign rights under international law. The Scarborough Shoal itself carries enormous strategic importance. Beyond its fishing resources, the reef sits near vital maritime routes used by global trade and energy shipments. Control over the area also provides significant surveillance and military advantages in the wider South China Sea. The dispute became especially serious in 2012 after a prolonged standoff between Chinese and Philippine vessels ended with China gaining effective operational control over the shoal. Since then, Chinese ships have maintained a near constant presence in the area, while Filipino fishermen have faced increasing restrictions. In 2016, an international arbitration tribunal ruled that China's broad territorial claims in the South China Sea had no legal basis under international law. The ruling also affirmed traditional fishing rights near Scarborough Shoal. China rejected the decision entirely and refused to recognize the tribunal's authority. Nearly a decade later, tensions remain unresolved. Inside the Philippines, political pressure on Marcos Jr. continues to grow. Opposition figures, security experts, and nationalist groups are demanding stronger action against Chinese incursions. Some are calling for expanded military modernization, while others want even closer cooperation with the United States and regional allies like Japan and Australia. At the same time, there are also concerns about the risks of escalation. Many Filipinos worry that a serious confrontation in the South China Sea could damage the economy, disrupt trade, and potentially draw the country into a much larger conflict involving major world powers. China remains one of the Philippines' largest trading partners, making the dispute economically sensitive as well as politically dangerous. Regional diplomats continue attempting to reduce tensions through negotiations and confidence-building measures. ASEAN nations have spent years discussing a possible code of conduct for the South China Sea aimed at preventing military escalation and improving crisis management. However, progress has been slow. Critics argue that negotiations have produced little concrete change, while maritime confrontations continue increasing across the region. Each new incident raises fears that an accident or miscalculation could rapidly spiral out of control. Recent encounters between Chinese and Philippine vessels have already demonstrated how dangerous the situation can become. Several confrontations involved collisions near collisions, water cannon attacks, and accusations of reckless behavior. Despite the risks, Marcos Jr. appears determined to continue defending Philippine maritime claims. His administration believes that remaining passive would only encourage further Chinese expansion in disputed waters. Philippine officials have repeatedly stated that the country will not surrender its sovereign rights or abandon fishermen operating within its exclusive economic zone. The crisis has also become part of a much larger geopolitical struggle unfolding across Asia. The South China Sea is one of the world's most strategically important waterways, carrying trillions of dollars in global trade every year. Multiple countries claim overlapping territories in the region, but the growing rivalry between China and the United States has transformed these disputes into a broader contest for regional influence and power. Washington sees freedom of navigation in the South China Sea as critical to international security and economic stability. China, meanwhile, views foreign military activity near its claimed waters as a threat to its national security and regional interests. The Philippines now finds itself caught at the center of this competition. President Marcos Jr. faces enormous pressure from both domestic and international audiences. He must protect Philippine sovereignty while avoiding direct military conflict with a far more powerful neighbor. He must strengthen alliances without appearing entirely dependent on foreign powers, and he must reassure the Filipino public while keeping regional diplomacy alive. So far, his strategy has focused on deterrence, transparency, and international cooperation. The Philippines has expanded joint patrols with allies, modernized parts of its military, increased Coast Guard operations, and pushed for stronger diplomatic support from Western and regional partners. Manila also continues filing diplomatic protests against Chinese actions in disputed waters. China, however, shows little sign of backing down. Beijing continues reinforcing its maritime presence across the South China Sea and insists that its territorial claims are historically justified. Chinese officials regularly accuse the Philippines of provocation and warn against foreign interference in regional disputes. As both sides harden their positions, Scarborough Shoal has once again become a symbol of the broader struggle shaping the future of the Indo-Pacific. For fishermen operating near the disputed waters, the crisis remains immediate and personal. Access to fishing grounds affects food security, income, and survival for many coastal communities or regional leaders. The dispute represents a major test of diplomacy and stability in Southeast Asia. And for the wider world, the growing tensions between China and the Philippines serve as a reminder of how quickly localized territorial disputes can evolve into international crises involving major powers, military alliances, and global economic interests. The coming months may prove critical. If diplomacy fails and confrontations continue escalating, the risk of a serious incident in the South China Sea will only increase. But if cooler heads prevail, there may still be room for negotiation and de-escalation before the situation reaches a dangerous breaking point. For now, however, the Scarborough Shoal remains one of the most volatile hotspots in Asia, and President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. stands directly at the center of a rapidly intensifying geopolitical storm.